Good morning, Mr. Clerk. Is the mayor joining us at 9:30? I haven't received any notification otherwise.
Neither have I, Councillor Caterina. I'm expecting he'll be here shortly, or else he would have advised us. But I mean, if you would like to start the meeting in his absence, it is 9:32.
I made it. It's password day.
Perfect.
Yesterday
Thank
was Sarah.
you.
Today it's me.
Thanks, Don. Phew.
All right.
All right.
So welcome back to the public hearing that keeps on giving. I'm going to do a roll call just to establish which members of council we have here today. I'm going to start this time with Councillor Zadig.
I am here. Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor Essinger.
Good morning.
Councillor Knack.
Good morning.
Councillor Hamilton.
Good morning.
Councillor Henderson.
Morning.
Councillor McKean.
Good morning.
Councillor Nicol.
Good morning.
Councillor Paquette.
Good morning.
Councillor Walters.
Go Oilers.
Councillor Banga. Councillor Banga. No Councillor Banga. Okay. Councillor Cartmel.
Good morning.
And Councillor Caterina.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Morning. Okay, well, that's enough to get started. So just to recap where we were at, I think we were halfway through new information and we had heard new information from the proponents. And then we are now at new information from those who had registered in opposition. Mr. Clerk, did you have the most recent list of who was hoping to address new information?
Yes, at this point, in opposition, we have Ellen Armstrong, who would like to speak to new information.
Okay, and I think we had a couple of others indicate, so I'm just going to ask now if there were others who wished to offer new information.
Yes, this is Megan Rich. I emailed in on Monday offering you, asking to speak.
Okay.
This is David Buchanan. I emailed in yesterday.
Okay, so Megan Rich, David Buchanan, and
I also emailed in last week.
Sarah Dawson. Okay.
And Andre Giasson, I mailed in as well.
Bien sûr.
Merci.
All right, then since we'll just go in order.
Sorry, it's Greg here. I registered last Friday as well.
Okay, so far I have Megan Rich, David Buchanan, Ellen Armstrong, Sarah Dawson, Andre Giasson, and Greg Miazga. Okay, well, let's start with Megan Rich, and we'll just go in the same order in which we had heard from folks previously. So, Ms. Rich, again, just a gentle reminder to mute yourselves when you're not presenting or answering questions, just to cut down on background noise. You will have up to 5 minutes. You're not required to use the whole 5 minutes for new information, but if you do have 5 minutes worth of new information, this is your time. And then there may well be follow-up questions on the new information. And just a reminder also, again, to avoid using the chat function in this meeting, just because it can create issues of fairness and decorum and also interfere technically with the live stream. If you do need assistance or have questions or wish to register to add further new information, please email city.clerk@edmonton.ca to get assistance. So welcome back, folks. Thank you for your perseverance. And Ms. Rich, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. I just have a couple of points to make. One is kind of minor and one is a little bit bigger. Firstly, I'd like to say that there is no community support for this project. The information provided by Ms. Bell as a community member is disingenuous. She is not just someone who happens to own a few rental properties in the Garneau neighborhood and thinks that the tower is a good idea. She actually owns the house that Belgian agreed to purchase at this site, and they will purchase it if this proposal is approved. Mr. Dalaba has said to some of our community league executive that Belgen is paying way too much for that house. So it is apparent that she has quite an economic gain should this approval of this proposal go. The second is more important, and it's the access for the fire department. Buildings of this size, anything over 3 stories, are to either provide a minimum turnaround or a direct route to a main road, which would be 109th Street. The only direct route is the east-west alley from 108A Street to 109th Street. While most of the alley is 8 meters wide, there is a point where the alley is only 5 meters wide between the commercial buildings at the west end, 8709 109th Street and 8715 109th Street. It is my understanding that the National Building Code 2019 Alberta Edition Division B Articles 3.2.5.6 and 3.2.5.4 state that fire vehicles require a minimum of a 6-meter clearance. While I know that there may be different municipal rules, it is my understanding that this code automatically overrides these. And this doesn't even include the problem addressed by the fire department of turning northbound onto 109th Street to exit. And that's all I really have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Rich. Questions on the new information?
Yeah, I'm curious about this because it really truly was new information for me. So, there's a number of the concerns that we're hearing from the fire folk, if I understand you correctly. One of them is the width of the street to begin with and whether or not parking can be on both sides. Am I right about that?
I understand on 108th Street, there is no parking on both sides, just one side.
Okay.
So they can get down 108th Street heading northbound, but they can't get out the alley. They can't do a turnaround in that alley and come back out. It's not wide enough. So they have to head out to 109th Street. And the there's a strip mall and then the Tang Bistro.
Right.
That's only 5 meters wide. So, and then to get onto 109th Street from there, because the alley is very narrow, they would have to either widen it somehow but both of those buildings have 0 setbacks on the side.
Right.
So I don't know, they have to knock one down.
Because there's no ability, I don't think, and the city wouldn't own enough land to put a turnaround into the bottom of 108A, would it?
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think
that's all privately held.
It is
right?
privately.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it can turn that corner, but then it can't turn they can't turn the next corner. They'd have to go.
They have to head out the alley because they can't head east because then they're forced into another alley and then the 5 meter with the poles and everything wouldn't happen.
And then that's constrained by the 2 buildings, the Tang Bistro which comes right up the property line is my memory.
Yes. And so does the strip mall with the Kyoto, Japan and everything. And that's right up to the.
Okay. So there is no ability to widen. So it's tight.
It's very tight.
Okay. And then we've already spoken about the problem of getting out on that 109th Street corner.
Yes.
Great. So going back, so now I understand. So going back south on the alley is not, they can't turn that corner.
No, they can't turn that corner and there wouldn't be the 5 meter clearance from the height either, down the north-south alley either.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Next was, if there are no further questions for Ms. Rich, not seeing any. Next would be Mr. Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'd like to take 3 minutes to bring 2 pieces of information to the attention of City Councillors. First, the developer addressed policy G3 to demonstrate how the Garneau Area Redevelopment Plan supports the proposed tower. However, the 4 provisions of policy G3 are supposed to be used to evaluate rezoning proposals for high-density development within designated areas, which are clearly highlighted on a map in Schedule C of the GARP and not throughout the entire community. Regardless, the proposed tower is not supported by all 4 points of policy G3 as suggested by the developer. The proposed tower meets points 1 and 2. It is in the northeast corner and near commercial. Point 3 concerns transitions. The GARP, as described in policy G4, does not indicate a transition from anything to anything. A transition at the proposed site would at least require infill that is lower than Strathcona House and with appropriate spacing. Again, as described in policy G4, which includes a diagram for reference. Point 4 concerns compatibility. Description of the proposed tower as adjacent to physically compatible forms of development ignores all residences other than Strathcona House. The developer further argues, on the one hand, that the GARP does not adequately address height transitions, and on the other, that modern architecture removes such considerations. I ask Council to carefully consider the claim that a podium of 2 to 4 stories is consistent with surrounding homes. The developer's argument, as outlined at the public hearing of 14th May, requires that you ignore the 80-meter tower or believe that the tower is not visible due to existing trees, and to dismiss the importance of proper setbacks. The developer's assertion that the site be interpreted as transitional, I think, is quite reasonable, but the proposed tower is not. My second point is that the developer's misrepresentation of the GARP is a predictable result of the unwillingness of the developer to work with the community. Besides 2 general information sessions required by the city, the developer contacted the Community League on 29th October 2020, 2 weeks prior to the public hearing on 17th November, but did not reply to a response indicating meeting availability. The developer then reached out on 27th April 2021, 1 week prior to the public hearing initially scheduled for 4th May. The 30-minute meeting on 29th April was used by the developer to present the project again. With only 2 business days before the public hearing, there was obviously no opportunity to organize an interested party meeting. A sincere commitment to collaborate with the intent to find common ground is not evident. The developer started his presentation by misrepresenting opposition to the development application as a general fear of change, and then continued with a misreading of the GARP. Genuine community engagement would have made it clear that Garneau's opposition is a matter of both appropriate land use and quality of life for both current and future residents. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. Questions? Councillor Henderson?
Yeah, I just wanted to explore one thing with you around we'll call it the GARP, but it is I think recognizably, an older plan, and there are newer ones, but it was based on good planning, I would argue, and I think we made that argument in the past. And
yes, so
this was perceived as the transitional zone. This is where we thought the transition would happen, and planning would suggest that you want to transition down. So, and I'm not hearing anybody say that that isn't the case. I think it raises an interesting question, though, that probably, I think the transition zone was anticipated in the original zoning clearly as RA7, as a kind of 4-story, which, and given the missing middle discussions we're having, probably is not what the transition should be. But so I wanted to explore with you the thought that, and I think I've heard this said, but I just wanted that no one's opposed to it being transitional, and that transition might be higher than the zoning that's there right now. But that means a missing middle piece. That means a mid-rise building and not a high-rise building. And I just wanted to check and make sure if I'd heard that correctly.
From what I hear amongst the community is that the development of that parking lot would be a positive change for both local residents and the community in general. I think the preference of community members is to adhere to the GARP, which would require a 4-story building. However, everyone knows that administration is strongly in favor of 6 stories on arterial roads as a form of transition and such. And so I think there would be room for negotiation, and that people are willing to consider that as part of the missing middle development.
Yeah, and given some of the other discussions we've had recently, unlike those other ones, the 6-story applications, this actually is truly transitional.
I agree. I would like to add one thing, though. I think no matter what is built in that space, I think the use of proper setbacks is a big issue.
Yeah.
It would remain so.
Yeah. And a standard zone would give you that. Whether it was RA7 or RA8, it would give you significantly, or even RA9, ironically, would give you much bigger setbacks than what we're looking at here, correct?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Buchanan? Not seeing any, then we'll hear next from Ellen Armstrong.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? There was no sound check, so I just want to make sure.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Good morning, Mayor Iveson and City Councilors. Can you please show slide 10 from Mr. Dulaba's presentation. Thank you. Excuse me. In new information, Mr. Dulaba states that this photo will give a clear idea of exactly how this tower will ultimately look and feel. In the illustration on the left, he has inserted what appears to be a miniature model of the hive that is not to scale. Strathcona House is 19 stories high, while the hive is proposed to be 27 stories, 8 stories higher. This image shows the hive as much shorter than it should be. There's also a lot of space between the towers. The proposed high-rise has a setback of as little as 20 meters to a maximum of 30 meters. From this vantage point, the space between the buildings should be much less than shown. In the right photo, the hive appears to be right on 109th Street. Neither of these photos are a clear idea of exactly how the tower will look. Then, okay, that's it with the slides. I don't really need anything more with that, thank you. He then switched to a view of 108A Street to discuss the changing character along the lane. First, he mentions Strathcona House, which is not on 108th Street. It's located at 10883 Saskatchewan Drive. Then he talks about a mid-rise, Manhattan Lofts, which is located further east along Saskatchewan Drive that has no access to 108A Street as it is situated north of the railroad tracks. He summarizes the built forms on this lane as some singles, some townhomes, some multi-unit 3-story apartment buildings, and some fourplexes. As this leads to his statement, and this leads to a statement, a 27-story high-rise being exactly where it wants to be. In reality, there are no fourplexes. There is one threeplex. There are no apartment buildings. There is the housing co-op, which is a 3-story walk-up. The majority of units on this lane are townhomes and single homes. I'm not sure how a 27-story high-rise wants to be on this family-oriented lane where there are no buildings higher than 3 stories. It is totally out of place and inappropriate at this location. Thank you for this opportunity to provide additional information today.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. Questions? I'm not seeing any at this point. Thank you. Next will be Sarah Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, I'm Sarah Dawson and I live in the townhome right next door to the proposed development. I've asked them to show slide 5. Thank you very much. So I would like to correct some details I discussed on Friday, as well as some characterizations given by City Planning last week, based on information in the agenda package regarding southern setbacks. So in my presentation, I stated setbacks from the property line would be 2.4 meters. However, on page 834 of the agenda package, it shows that the ground level setback towards our home varies between 0 meters, as in no setback at all, and 2.4 meters. Inspecting the diagrams in the package more closely, we see there is 0 setback at all right where our outdoor deck begins, 0 setback right outside our kitchen and dining room windows, based on Appendix 2 east elevation diagrams on page 861, showing a parkade entrance that actually juts out from the ground level podium, extending right to the property line. So it's not the case that the setbacks are consistently at 2.4 meters away from our home. Rather, they are between no setback at all and 2.4 meters. Looking at the diagram on my slide, you can see there's a portion in red that appears to be part of the above ground parkade entrance. It's clearer on other diagrams, but the point is not all of this red portion is empty space between the buildings. Page 834 of the city's agenda states, quote, "The portion where the building is along the property line with no setback is where the facade faces the waste collection and surface parking area of the townhouse development to the south, so this is not a concern," end quote. This characterization does not match the diagrams where it appears there is 0 setback along our property line all the way from the back deck to just outside our dining room window. In their Friday presentation, City Planning stated that the setbacks towards residential property lines have been, quote, prioritized, end quote. I strongly question this characterization because in this line, I am to believe that not prioritizing a setback means it will be 0. And if it's prioritized, it will be between 0 and 2.4 meters, which is much, much smaller than any standard RA7, 8, or 9 building. And based on the diagrams we've examined, will significantly impact our privacy, use, and enjoyment of our home. So to reiterate, the new information is setbacks between our property and the proposed development is not 2.4 meters, but between 0 and 2.4. And finally, at the points where it is at 0 meters, the lack of setback will affect our privacy and our use and enjoyment of our property significantly. We're not against development of these adjacent properties, but we do feel this is too big and too close for comfort. So please don't approve this proposal in its current form. And thank you very much for the time to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Dawson. Councillor Henderson, questions?
Yeah, so you have windows on that north side?
We do, yes. We have, there's even a little deck for a barbecue,
Yeah.
And then some windows, yeah.
And then your deck is at the back.
No, there's two. There's a back deck, and then there's also a side deck for a barbecue off the kitchen, yeah.
And I'm just trying to look through here because where it's 0 is the parkade entrance. And how high is your building? Do you know?
I'm not 100% sure. We're 2 stories.
So two and a half stories. So it's probably around 8.9 or 10 meters. And can you remember? I'll keep on looking it up. How high that wall is there?
Well, I'm not sure, but it does appear that there's a parkade entrance. So it's not just the ground level podium, but there's actually another structure out from it. It's a bit lower. It would be lower than the podium, though.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I'll have a look. I can pull the DC and have a look myself. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Next up will be Monsieur Jasson.
Good morning, Mayor Iverson and councillors. Andre here, and I'm back. With regard to the matter of new business, I wish to begin by correcting Mr. McCullough's assertion of city administration, which was made during the City Council public hearing of last Friday afternoon. When speaking in support of the proposed minimal street setback for the Hive of just 1.7 meters off 108 A Street, Mr. McClellan referenced the Garneau Estates street setbacks as being rather small, stating that they are only 3 meters. However, in actual fact, the setbacks for the Garneau Estates units are indeed 3.9 meters, according to real property survey reports. Mr. McClellan also confirmed last Friday that Belgium is intending to only construct 1 loading bay for the Hive, which would and could only be accessed by using the very narrow north-south lane. It is my understanding that this would contravene and hence would not comply with Edmonton bylaw number 12800, which requires a minimum of 2 loading bays for any building exceeding 200 units. However, you will recall during my presentation of this past Friday, 3 of my slides that specifically show just how often this very narrow north-south lane can become quite congested or indeed even blocked. 1 loading bay for ongoing moving activities, large and small deliveries, and the regular servicing of this proposed mammoth 27-story high-rise tower, comprising up to 245 units, I believe should be deemed unacceptable, as it would most certainly result in an increased congestion in this north-south lane, thereby creating a negative impact for those 6 small restaurants that specifically rely upon this laneway for their regular supply food deliveries, as well as for the surrounding neighborhood where on-street parking is already very limited and often non-existent. Furthermore, Mr. McClellan also confirmed that 1 utility pole in this particular section of the said very tight north-south lane would need to be moved in order to allow garbage trucks to properly turn into and out of the Hive. There are a total of 9 utility poles that flank the entire length of the subject narrow laneway, running from 86th Avenue to the south to the intersection of the east-west laneway to the north. They all constrict the lane width to significantly less than 5 meters. The current Hive proposal incorporates a 0 setback along its full length. So where would this particular utility pole be moved to? Underground? With a 0 setback, there is no physical space remaining to allow for a 5-meter wide laneway. Moreover, if I understood correctly during the public hearing of this past Friday afternoon, Ms. Sabo of City Administration indicated that the traffic generated by the Hive would, and I quote, be a drop in the bucket for the surrounding neighborhood. And she based this assertion upon the findings of the already referenced TIA commissioned by Belgium. I believe that the TIA should be considered woefully inadequate, primarily due to the conclusions with regard to the traffic movements in and around the site. which are based upon only 3 hours of observation by one person and for only one day. And it appears that a significant amount of that time and attention was spent observing traffic on 109th Street and 86th Avenue. Interestingly enough, Ms. Sabo shared with us that during her site visit undertaken the very day before our Friday meeting, she observed a parked delivery truck in the north-south lane in the process of servicing one of the subject 6 restaurants in the strip mall to the west of the Hive site. This resulted in a complete blockage of any traffic movement in this alley, as there is no room to pass around the delivery truck or any stopped vehicle in this said tiny laneway. For those of us who live in close proximity to this area, parked delivery trucks in this narrow laneway are a daily occurrence. This was also not mentioned at TIA, likely due to the very short observation time of this particular laneway. Hence, in closing, it is so important to emphasize that all traffic that would be generated by the rear side of the Hive, such as the underground and surface parking, visitor parking, waste disposal, delivery activity, building maintenance, etc., all of the aforementioned would and could only stream in and out of the same very narrow north-south lane, which would undoubtedly result in a quite negative impact upon the residents and businesses of the surrounding neighborhood. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Jesson?
Maybe quickly.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Because we haven't talked about this a lot. I meant, the one way out when that lane is blocked is out straight onto 109th. But to talk a little bit about the conditions on 109th, which you guys are familiar with, that's between 2 lights and a major egress from the university that then tries to get down and across the river there, correct? And so traffic backs up between those lights?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah?
For sure.
Because that intersection to the north of there is very complex. So you've got High Level Bridge, which splits into 2. You've got Saskatchewan Drive, and you've got Lauderdale going down.
Yes.
So and a huge amount of pedestrian and bike movement as well. Correct?
For sure.
We've been struggling with that intersection for a long time. So to be clear, where this alley comes out is probably closer to that more complex intersection, but in that half block between those 2 lights where the traffic backs up, correct?
Yes.
So getting in and out of there at rush hour is a challenge, I suspect.
Without any doubt, Councillor Henderson, that the traffic there is always congested. And during rush hour, it's even more so, for sure.
So I suspect the other option is turning up through, at rush hour, is turning up through the strip mall, which is private property, so that you can use that light, which is strictly speaking a stop sign, not a light, but it probably is a bit easier to get out that way.
Yeah, but it's problematical because that strip mall tried to have the exiting of that little parking lot out onto the east west laneway from the Tang Bistro, because a lot of people are using that as a shortcut.
Yeah, I'm guessing. I totally understand why they would do that. I'm just really, I think I'm fairly familiar with it, but I don't know if council is. So that's why I just thought it would be good to get a description of it. So
okay,
great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Jesson? Not seeing any. Then next will be Greg Miazga.
Good morning, Mayor and councillors. Somebody needs to say it, so I will. Happy snow day. We love it, right? So I have 2 points of new business to make to the roadways that surround the Hive site. And actually, Andre and Councillor Henderson were talking on one of my points. So I'll make that a bit condensed and frame it like this. Councillor Henderson posed a question last Friday regarding this very north alley where it connects to 109th Street. And the question was, would the city now ever design an alley connection so close to the complex intersection we've just been talking about? Ms. Sabo replied, no. So my comment to this question and answer is this. I do not consider it acceptable or safe to add the traffic volume generated by the Hive. And we're not just talking vehicles, obviously pedestrians, cyclists, scooters, deliveries, etc., to current conditions, which are already quite congested at times, to where this alley connects to 109th Street. And we also need to remember that the sidewalk on the east side of 109th Street is very heavily used, and we're grateful for that, of course, but it is heavily used. And of course, what I'm saying will be further exacerbated by the introduction of the shared use trail. Also during construction, this alley connection to 109th Street will be one of 2 main entry/exit points to the site for construction activities, dramatically impacting, I believe, the function and safety of 109th Street near the complex intersection. The second point I want to make is this. We've all been shown and seen renderings of the Hive prepared by the developer, which show wide, unhindered lanes surrounding the Hive site. I am disappointed, and I use the word disappointed very carefully, that city administration has adopted some of these same renderings and included them in their final report in the agenda. These same renderings are also included in the city administration hearing presentation. For example, the rendering showing 3 lanes of parallel parking behind Strathcona House instead of the 1 single line of perpendicular parking. And of course, this slide has the City of Edmonton logo on it. By implication, city administration is endorsing the images of wide, unhindered roadways for council's consideration. You've also seen photographs taken by opposition speakers, including myself, of the street and the alleys that surround the Hive. These photos show what is there, a completely different reality than the renderings. As a career civil engineer, I consider the street and alley infrastructure around the site to be one of the primary determining factors to gauge the merits of the proposal. And I simply conclude that the roadway infrastructure on the site does not support a high-rise. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Mayaska?
Just a really quick one, because I'm remembering one other complexity of that 109th Street piece, but I can't remember exactly what its current condition is. Because the lane that you would be turning into there is a right turn only lane. If you're actually trying to go straight on 9th, you would have to cut across 2 lanes, correct?
Correct.
And it used to be a bus lane, but I think the bus lane now ends at the previous lights, but my memory may be fuzzy on that as well. I think when we redid that intersection on Walterdale Hill, we actually ended the bus lane 1 block earlier, but I just thought I'd check on that.
Yeah, it is a right turn lane only.
Yeah. So the buses turn at the previous light, which is half a block the other way, to get in, to go straight down Walterdale Hill. So to be able to go south, you would have to cut across 2 lanes to be able to get into the traffic that is waiting at that light, basically 100 yards, well, less than that, probably 50 yards further on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
Any other questions? Any other new information?
Mr. Mayor, can I speak to a couple of these points as new information?
Yeah, go ahead. On the second round of new information, go ahead, Mr. Dillaba.
Great, thank you. Mr. Clerk, can you please refer to slide 6 in my presentation?
Yes, we'll bring that up, Mr. Dulaba.
Thank you. I would just like to speak quickly to the comments regarding the interface and setbacks along the south property line as raised by the property owner immediately to the south. In the southwest corner there, a dark shaded, it's an elevation of maximum height of 5 meters. That actually is the only portion where there is a 0 lot line setback. We then advance to a 1.2 meters, and then there is some step backs above the second floor of the podium that wraps around there. That was done obviously with intent, just to ensure there is a transition. Mr. Clerk, can you please also refer to slide 17 in my presentation as well? Thank you. This shows the existing conditions and the interface along the south property line, immediately adjacent to that townhome. As you can see, there are 3 large spruce trees. One, obviously, on the very furthest to the west, is due replacement. These sit on the property to the south. As you can see, they do provide a visual screen from that property immediately to the north there. And there also is a parking lot, a non-accessory parking lot component immediately to the west of the garage. So when we talk about whether or not that 0 setback along the south property line is appropriate, I would say considering the existing conditions that exist on that being pretty much a sea of asphalt and the alley, garbage enclosure, and that there is additional screening of those trees to provide a visual screen from the balcony to our site, whether it be immediately looking horizontally, or if you want to refer, the tower is set back a minimum of 5.3 meters to the south property line, and that carries along the entire south property line. And then we do have it sitting on that podium. So again, we want to talk about good urban design and interface between this townhome and ours. We did take that consideration, and that was a discussion point that we talked with the planning on multiple points to ensure that as much as we were trying to ensure this tower was set back a reasonable distance from the tower to the north, we also wanted to ensure that it was sitting on the podium and provided a bit of transition and relief from the existing developments to the south. So we didn't just plant it and say, well, here it is. There was a significant amount of discussions and negotiations with administration on that item, and that is something we think we've addressed appropriately. Just to speak also a little bit regarding, my comments on the GARP and the city plan, I think I've made my point clear that, the adoption of the new city plan was a message to the city and the Edmontonians that we want change. And the fact that you've set a target of 600,000 new residents, that's 60% of the existing 1 million people, to basically find new homes within our existing neighborhoods within the Henday Belt, shows that you want to change the way how we've developed over the last 50, 60 years. And I think it's unrealistic to think that choosing this path won't be met with opposition and difficulties. This plan has essentially drawn lines in the sand, indicating this is the type of built form and intensity we want to develop in a city. And we think that this is a reflection of this vision with our proposal. As it relates to GARP, we still firmly believe that we meet the 4 criteria as set forth in policy G3, and that it does actually meet all those. I have stated there are no more land uses designated for high density in the Garneau ARP. So as to the comments, the plan did its thing 30 years ago, over the last 30 years. It's a plan from 1982. And if we look at what was good planning and deemed good planning in 1982 compared to today, there's a lot of differences. And yes, the plan, I think, has achieved the objectives, but now I think it's ready for its next chapter in alignment with the goals and objectives set forth in the city plan. As the developers, we can only propose buildings that we think align with the goals of city plan, ARP, and other relevant documents. The final decision ultimately lays with you, council. So what type of city do you want us to build? Is it one that supports the changes you seek out in the new plan? Or are we saying we're okay with the status quo and we're not ready for that? Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Dell'Abo? Not seeing any. Any other new information?
Mr. Chair, we have received a request from Greg Miazga to speak to new information in opposition.
Go ahead, Mr. Miazga.
Thank you. Just following up on Chris's comments there regarding the south interface. To be honest, I ran some numbers last night because I actually read the DC2 document in detail last night, and it's actually, in my opinion, different than the city report conclusion. And I will describe it as this. On page 834 of the city administration report, very specifically under the ground level interface section at the south side, they talk about a setback of 0 and then 2.4 meters. And I and other neighbors had assumed 2.4 meters would be what would be opposite Sarah's residence there. And in fact, the DC2 says that the setback is 1.4 meters up to a height of 8 meters, then only stepping back to 2.4 meters above an elevation of 8 meters. So it's kind of confusing at a minimum when the city report says nothing about 1.4 meters at the ground level. The second thing I want to say in running numbers, the zero setback extends over the garage portion at least by about 4 meters towards 108A Street. And that's the zone that Sarah's private upper outdoor balcony is. So that really affects privacy in a very personal way. Then right adjacent to your outdoor private deck at a zero setback is the Hive. So all that to say, you know, we're reasonable, but you know, asking for every square millimeter almost of a site to be used in development is really, to quote Andrew McClellan, pushing the envelope. It really is, you know. So that's what I have to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Miazga on that? No? Any other new information?
Mr. Mayor, could I just speak to one point made up earlier?
The third round of new information. Please try to get it all done on this shot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to make a comment regarding, there was a question on the scale of the renderings that we use. We actually, those renderings are to scale. Those were done with a very professional rendering consultancy, using the specifics and everything in terms of the maximum development and our elevations provided. So there is no misrepresentation in any of the illustrations we provided. And I just want to make that clear and on the record. Thank you.
Understood. Last call for new information. Okay, not hearing any.
I'm prepared to move closure of the public hearing.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson.
Second.
I think that was Councillor McKean.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Please vote on closure of the public hearing.
Yes.
I'm locked out as well today, so I'm a yes.
Yes.
And Councillor Paquette and Councillor Hamilton are also verbally yes, I believe.
And we would also need Councillor Nichols' vote, please.
I already sent in my vote. It was a yes, sir.
Thank you. We have all the votes, Mr. Chair.
Display the vote. Closure of the public hearing is carried.
I'm not prepared to move first reading, Mr. Mayor, but I would like to speak to it.
Okay.
I'll put first reading on the table for debate, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Nichol.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor McKean. Okay, Councillor Henderson to speak.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I first heard of the building, I was, you know, I really was undecided about this. I wanted to listen, and I do credit the applicants, I think, for taking a complex site and doing their best with it. I think this is a nicely designed building, and I wish it was built somewhere. But you know, and I'm more confirmed than anything by what we've heard in the public hearing. I'm more convinced than ever that it's too big a building for an overly constrained site for a number of different reasons. I think, you know, let's talk about the laneways first. This is a dead-end street, a dead-end narrow, a residential local road. And there's the only way out is by laneways that are constrained in one direction by the fact that you're going to have loading vehicles there, and currently, in order to keep those businesses operating. And the other way out is not only has a problematic exit onto 109th Street, but is also the place where we're taking our major new multi-use trail. It is the major connection, active transportation between the university and Old Strathcona. And this is the one place where we cannot separate it from traffic, where everybody's going to have to be able to share the space. And I think putting this extra stress on that is going to make what's already a far from ideal situation worse, and make that whole effort in trying to make those connections and use that rail trail more problematic and perhaps dangerous. I'm also concerned by the fact that the co-op on the other side of the street will be in shade for all of its afternoon and evening henceforward with this building going forward. And I would just point out that this is a co-op that has been there, that did what we wanted to do decades ago, and committed to family-friendly densification in our neighborhoods. This is a stacked townhouse, and Lord knows we don't have enough of those, that has proved successful in doing exactly what we want and attracting families to our inner core in denser neighborhoods. And to make it that their public space, the space that they use for their recreation, and put it in shade henceforward for all the parts of the day when you would want to use it, I think is problematic and goes against the good planning and design for the neighborhood. I'm also really concerned at how close it is. It's constrained on the site to the extent that this is way closer to the road, that everything will be way closer to the street itself than we would allow even in RA9, certainly in RA7 and RA8. So that sense of space on the street, space on the boulevard vanishes and will radically change the feel of the street. And it's just not good design. And it's like that because in order to try and get a proper podium on this, they're having to take way more space than is really there to do that. And that's also affecting the building to the south, where clearly a straight wall is going to go up the height of the house, way closer than we would allow in this kind of zoning, under standard zoning, and then will be even zero lot line at the height of their balconies. Further on with, I think, a rooftop amenity that will be right at that height as well. It's, and then I usually wouldn't worry. I think the Strathcona House, I think we have to recognize that this is going to substantially affect the value of their properties. There is going to affect their views. It's going to affect their sunlight. It's going to make a huge difference. And I recognize in often circumstances that isn't really an issue, but I think they had a reasonable expectation, given a plan, when they bought those properties, that this is not what would be happening on the site next to them. And I think that is something we have to take into consideration because, and this goes to my last point, the GARP, you may be dated in some ways, but it was good planning in the sense it's still part of our city plan to say that we should be stepping down and transitioning from our higher densities into our lower heights. And that's all the GARP really is calling for us to do here. I think probably RA7 doesn't make sense. I think probably it should be a bit taller than that, but I'm not hearing opposition to that idea. This is exactly where the missing middle should be going. And we keep on arguing why it's missing. And it's because we don't take the opportunities to do the missing middle. We immediately go to one extreme or the other. And I think good transition is part of good planning. And although GARP may be a bit dated, it is still good planning. And it's good planning that exists in our new city plan as well. So I really, with some regret, because I think they've worked hard to come up with a good design and do the best they can, but this is just too constrained a site. And I would really, really encourage council to say no to this. I think it's problematic on all sorts of levels. It's too big a building crammed into too small and too odd a space. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I feel like this is just a continuing, like every Garneau item, we've had these long discussions, and I feel like I've had to talk to all of them because truly there's a lot of different parts to each of these applications that are truly complex, and I don't think any of them over the last couple of weeks have been clear one way or another, in my mind at least. So it's probably unsurprisingly that this one equally, in my mind, has some really good positives and some challenges that I think are worth talking about. And I'm really interested to hear additional perspectives to help inform a final discussion, because I feel like I'm sort of on the fence on this for a variety of reasons. So I'll start by covering a few things in that. While I do appreciate the uniqueness of the roadway network that we're talking about, the last census data I was able to pull, I try to remind myself that this is a neighborhood that I think compared to almost to any other neighborhood in the entire city, has a majority of people who don't drive. And so, the last census data has only about 40% of Garneau residents driving compared to 60% using other modes of transportation. And so I do worry a little bit about what felt like a fairly heavy focus on transportation for a community that has generally chosen other modes, especially with the location of this. And so to even Councillor Henderson's point, when I think about that place where we're talking about sharing the road, I would be shocked if the vast majority of residents in a building like this wouldn't be using alternative modes based off their proximity to these other safe alternatives. So I that part to me has felt a little bit odd in our discussion, because I think we spent a little more time than I would have thought on this, just based off where it's located, what it's connected to, and even acknowledging the uniqueness of this road. The other piece goes to, and I do appreciate, I think the Garneau Area Redevelopment Plan is actually a pretty good plan. It's one of the few area redevelopment plans, old or new for that matter, that seem to generally work in terms of accomplishing our goals. I will say the one part that I'm struggling with a bit here as well is this notion, when we talk about step backs or transitions, does that mean we should only ever have something right along the two arterial roads and that is it forever and always? Or should the transition be able to be a little more gradual as it comes into the neighborhood? And I don't know. I just, with the way the city plan is designed, does it mean that the highest of high densities will only ever be on that, and even essentially one step in, we won't consider higher densities? That is absolutely the only place where we can start accepting middle and then go low from there. I don't know, but I do think that's a question we have to think about when we're dealing with community development. So I think the area redevelopment plan has been thoughtful in that. The part where I struggle, and I appreciate the last rounds of new information though, is the setbacks, and particularly to the properties on the south. It feels like for a constrained site, this has done a really fantastic job of managing the distance to the other building on the north side. I thought that did a phenomenal job. I think I really do not have the concerns that I would have normally in tower development. I think they've done an excellent job of proximity to that building, trying to find ways to minimize overall impacts. So there will still, of course, be an impact, but I actually thought it was an excellent way to do that. It's the properties on the south and how that interacts there. And that is my biggest holdup today. That is where my biggest struggle is right now. I do appreciate the last series of pictures, and I've actually driven that spot myself, to go to a couple of stores there in the past. I've parked right around there numerous times over the years. And so I do appreciate that there are trees and other pieces of other things to help with that. But that is the one area that I have struggled with this one. So with 15 seconds left, I feel like I'm leaning a little more towards support, but I also appreciate the ward councillor's perspective, and so I'm very interested to hear from some of my other colleagues on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Caterina, could you take the chair?
I have the chair, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So it definitely is a constrained site, a very complex site with some tricky access. But I think that, first of all, around the issue of buildability, whether it's 4 stories, 6 stories, or a high rise, it's going to be a challenging site to develop. So to me, the question is, if we're at some point going to go through and put the neighbors through the challenge and disruption of excavation and utility upgrades and so on and so forth, what do we want to have installed when we're done from an overall city planning perspective? And it doesn't automatically follow that the largest possible building should go there. But I think all of the arguments about challenging access apply regardless of the size of the building. And so whether it's medium density or high density or medium rise or high rise, I'm not sure makes a difference in terms of the buildability and the constraint. The real questions then become the transitions to the adjacent uses and the mitigations. And again, on a previous item in Garneau, we had an extensive debate about the adequacy of transitions, privacy screening, setbacks, step backs, and so on and so forth. And we had a mixed decision on that. So not to reopen old wounds there. But in this case, I think overall we see thoughtful transition and step back and setback. And I understand that the argument in GARP is smaller building, medium building, large building. And all of the things being equal at the scale of the transect across several blocks, that makes sense. But in certain circumstances, the question is, can you make that transition on the same site with step backs and setbacks and terracing and so on and so forth? And I think that at great pains to satisfy our design committee, that this application achieves that and establishes a transition from the adjacent lower rise and medium density uses adjacent. Because the step back is, the setback to the south is tight, but is at the same scale and notched as if it was an adjacent ground-oriented unit. And then it steps in and then it goes up. And I think that is the mitigation. And because if it was a house being built next to it or a row house being built next to it, you would have the same step back at 1.4. On the question of impact to adjacent properties, I would just observe that the presence of the parking lot in the condition that it's in is also potentially a negative impact to property values. To understand the delta, I think there may be impacts positive and negative, but I think the primary value of the adjacent units is not a function of the view, particularly the south-facing view. It is the square footage, it is the location. And so if there are incremental impacts, in my judgment, they would be minor, and I haven't heard evidence to the contrary. Finally, I agree with Councillor Knack that the focus on transportation impacts in this location in particular, I struggle with. Again, I think if it was a mid-rise building, there would be incremental impacts to the lane and to access issues. And the issues in the lane are because of the mix of uses in the neighborhood in the first place, which is what makes it desirable for people to want to live there in the first place, is the presence of the amenities and the boutique businesses and so on and so forth, to which I presume, and the TIA presumes, and our zoning bylaw presumes, people in a location like this, in a building like this, will primarily walk, bike, and take transit to. And to the extent that some of them will have cars and will use them occasionally, it is very easy to assume that that is going to destroy the performance of the lane when at the rates of trip generation, even in a building this size, that actually manifests, it will have very little incremental impact. So I'll be supporting the application. I'll take the chair back and go to Councillor
Chair.
Thank you. I will take a bit of a different approach. I'm generally in support right now. A lot of good arguments have been made, but just some other observations. I really like the neighborhood of Garneau. I always have, but actually until this application came forward, I just thought Garneau existed west of 109th Street. I view the eastern portion as a bit differently, and of course, so does the area redevelopment plan. But this type of development, I think, is more appropriate in this area than it would be west of 109th Street. I also think that those not overly familiar with the Garneau area redevelopment plan would just assume that this type of development would be permitted here. And that's just an observation, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do what's in the plan. It's just that as this area has developed and matured and infill has come in, I think we're expecting something sort of different in this area, the general public. So when we go back to this really old plan, and I've heard from my colleagues about how good this plan is, I wasn't really familiar with it prior to researching it for this, to debate this application. I do think that its age is a touch problematic, given what we've done with precedent to older plans elsewhere in the city when we have similar types of debates. I also think it's important that we share the River Valley views with others. It's not just a first come and first served sort of basis. All the apartments that line the River Valley have been there for a very long time. Many of them are several decades old. Who's to say that they won't redevelop at a certain point in time, or that when they first came in, that set the standard for height and nothing could go higher? There could be a situation in several years or decades from now when the Strathcona building comes down due to age and something larger goes up there. And conversely, if this development is approved, I'm sure there would be equal and legitimate concerns about sizing and space and distance between the buildings and the interfacing concerns we heard about today. Not to minimize anything that we heard about today, I'm somewhat satisfied with the solutions that have been put in place. I recognize it's not perfect. And in a future development scenario with other buildings, these are continue to be the debates that we have. So with all that, I'm leaning towards support, still listening to the debate though. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Banga.
Thank you. Don't know where to begin, but anyway, I'm going to try to begin by saying that I am usually pretty favorable to new development, and the reason for that is I truly believe that if we kept sticking to I guess the promises that were made 50 years ago, 100 years ago by previous councils, we would still be crossing the river with a canoe. And anyway, leaving that aside, we need to change at some point in time. But that change can be gradual, and it has to be acceptable. This development is a great design, and I agree with the administration's conclusion that the traffic would be minimal, I guess, of disruption. And I do realize that that this council recently approved a city plan, and it is supported by this development. And I also would agree with a couple of previous speakers that most of the folks residing in this development are probably going to be using alternative modes of transportation. I have no issues there. If this building or this development was anywhere else, I would have no issues at all. However, I do see that this is a quite constrained site, and looking at egress from this development would be onto 109th Street. First of all, it's a pretty narrow alley. And then secondly, it is leading to a place where it's a busy street on 109th Street, and there is again it used to be a bus lane, now it's a right turn lane already, and I do realize that it's going to be a problematic situation today, and it would be a problematic situation even further down the road. As far as the neighbors to the south are concerned, they are definitely going to be affected. I mean, every new development is going to be affecting positively or negatively the other places around what is being built. But in this case, it is too close to the neighbors to the south. And would I be crying foul if I was living in one of those places? Of course I would be. Again, these are three things that are really giving me a concern. One is constraint site, the other one is access to the site, and where this egress is leading to on 109th Street. I usually support these kind of applications, but in this situation, I think it is this is the one that if I'm not going to support, this would be the one. So for a change, I am not going to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Banga. Any others wishing to speak? Councillor Nicol to close.
I really wasn't going to speak to him, Mr. Mayor. I'll be quick. I have to, I'm in agreement with Councillor Henderson. He's made all the points very aptly and succinctly. This is just too big for the site that we're on. This is the height of the tower, in my opinion, even though it can be constructed, is just a tower that needs more land to it, just to respect the material impacts to the neighbors. So I'm not, even though I did put it on the floor, I'm not going to support it though. Thank you very much.
Understood. Please vote on first reading.
I'm a yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton.
I'm a yes as well, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Caterina.
I'm a yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Walters.
I'm a yes as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're also missing, or we haven't received yet, Councillor Esslinger's vote and Councillor Paquette's.
I'll be a yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Esslinger.
I'm also a yes.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. We have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Display the vote. That's carried 10-3. Would one of the 10 of you like to put the second reading on the floor?
Moved, Zadok.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor McKean. Please vote on second reading.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Katerina.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Esslinger. And we still need Councillor Zadik's vote and Councillor Paquette's.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Zadik.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. We have all the votes.
Display the vote, please. Carried 10-3.
I'll move, are we at consideration right now?
Yeah.
Consideration for third reading for all to be read in the same public hearing.
Second. Seconded by Councillor McKean. Please vote to allow third reading to proceed.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Katerina.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Esslinger. Mr. Mayor and Councillor Paquette, if we could have your votes, please. Thank you, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And did we hear from Councillor Paquette? Okay, so we received his vote electronically. Thank you. We have all the votes.
Display the vote, please. That's carried. Third reading.
Third reading of Charter Bylaw 19481.
Second. Thank you. Please vote on third and final reading.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillors Hamilton and Katerina.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Esslinger.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have all the votes.
Display the vote, and the ayes have it 10-3. Okay. Any subsequent business arising? Not hearing any. Are there any notices of motion today? Hearing none, then this public hearing is adjourned. Thank you.